Record. Hey everyone, as you are joining here, let me know if you have any technical difficulties. We're figuring this out with you. But excited that you all are choosing to join myself, Stuart Balcom, and Jay Filiatro here today. We have a fun session. Hopefully, this is going to be helpful for some folks who have been in similar shoes, as Jay a little more recently than I, but uh, also relatively recently made a switch from being in-house to doing my own thing. Uh, and we're here in the solopreneur track. So we're going to try to, I'm going to, this is going to be easy for me at least. I'm just going to quiz Jay about his experience starting his own thing. But hopefully there'll be some good insights in here. If you have questions, please drop them in the chat. We will try to keep this as sort of free flowing and open and as relevant to the folks who are here specifically. So give just another minute maybe for folks to join us. But yeah, thanks for joining us today. I'm curious, where is everybody? Maybe we can use our own breakout chat. Like, where's everybody sort of joining from, and like, what sort of stage of your own journeys are you at? Helpful context, I think.
Is the breakout chat separate from the main chat?
If it is, I don't know how to get to it. I was
Yeah,
just
same.
trying to get through that same thing. Is that the same for everybody else, that it's just
Doesn't
one
doesn't look like it. Yeah.
main
So
chat? Yeah.
Yeah, it says chat's disabled.
Oh, well.
Okay.
Okay, well, just unmute and raise a hand, and we'll get to questions that way. Right, yes. Okay. Well, let's dive into it. So Jay, maybe sort of for folks who don't know you, we first met when you were in-house. I was also in-house at the time. I was at Arrows, you were at Chameleon. Maybe just give
Correct.
us a little background on what you were doing in. So set the stage, like before you started doing your own thing, what were you doing in-house as sort of the starting point?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I found my way to B2B SaaS around 2012 after trying a whole bunch of entrepreneurial ventures in my 20s and quickly developed an affinity for the operational side of things. I've always been interested in go-to-market and commercialization and technology, so kind of married my two passions and running the operational side of things from a GTM standpoint. I've worked with a lot of early stage companies, so the kind of role where you wear all the hats, typically as head of growth or head of sales and marketing operations. Yeah, B2B SaaS, seed stage, Series A. And before starting my own business, I joined a company called Chameleon. It's a digital adoption platform that helps build in-app guides for people that are running a PLG motion, and held the role of head of growth there, which resulted in me being the de facto CRM admin and head of RevOps, as well as running a bunch of growth experiments across the business.
Nice. So I guess so the first maybe obvious question, like why leave, Chameleon is a growing SaaS company. What sort of prompted you to start thinking like maybe I don't want to be in-house anymore, maybe I want to go do my own thing? Was there sort of a specific moment, or is there, an evolution of like this is getting more and more interesting over time?
I guess it's a combination of things. I've always had an entrepreneurial itch. Like I said, in my 20s, I tried a whole bunch of stuff. Like started e-commerce stores, was involved in the poker business for a long time, ran a poker league, ran a restaurant for a couple of years. So I've always wanted to run my own business, but didn't really know in which industry I wanted to do that. And I kind of gave up on it when I joined B2B SaaS because I was learning a lot. I was really enjoying the journey of building from scratch and like seeing really like material impact on all the initiatives that you put in place. And I also worked with a lot of early stage founders and realized that maybe I don't want to have that amount of weight on my shoulders, be responsible for the income of hundreds of people and be accountable to a board of VCs and have expectations of growing, triple, double in revenue year over year. So I kind of gave up on my ambition to start a business. And after the I guess the VC crash in 2022, I started thinking that there's an opportunity that's opening up. I think typically where I see startups build an internal RevOps function is around Series B, and they're typically cleaning up a huge mess of technical debt and procedural debt. And to reach the milestones to raise your Series B, you need a solid foundation. You need a solid RevOps go-to-market process. So I thought it was an opportunity to. I think the market of fractional RevOps consulting is going to grow in the early stage, or is growing in the early stage. So that's kind of what catalyzed my decision. And also talked it through a little bit with the founder at Chameleon, and I was really, really lucky to have his support in starting my endeavor. So kind of de-risk things. He offered me the opportunity to gradually reduce my hours and build up an initial set of clients before move to a contractual role with the business.
Yeah, let's get into that a little bit because I think for everybody who is in-house and is considering, has aspirations to go run their own thing, manage their own schedule, have their own list of clients, sort of do things their way, so to speak. It feels pretty risky, right? It feels like it's a big decision to go make that leap. What are some of the things that sort of went into that decision process for you, and what are some of the things that you did actually before you made the jump to make it sort of feel like, okay, this is a thing that I can realistically go pull the trigger on?
That's a great question. And I think guts is what held me back, I think, for a long time, and like trying additional entrepreneurial ventures after a bunch of failures, or a bunch of learning experience, I should say, in my 20s. I'd say probably like threefold. One is speaking to my network. Like I have a network of founders that I think, or I thought at the time, were going to be my ICP in this agency, and just reaching out to them and asking them for feedback. I'm thinking of starting this business. I think that there's this gap in the market. I think this is the type of services and the type of value that I can provide a business like yours. And getting that validation. Initially, what I start that conversation, a lot of them are like, why are you building a service agency? Why don't you build a product a little bit more scalable? But at the end of that conversation, and sharing my vision that I think there's a huge gap in the early stage market, especially with the difficulty of raising subsequent rounds, most of those conversations ended in them saying, well, let me know when you get started. Love to work with you. So that helped validate my assumption that there's a market, and that my positioning, I think, was on point, and my positioning really being at the intersection of go-to-market strategy and the technical implementation of systems and process.
Yeah, and that's an interesting sort of nuance there, that you were thinking about positioning, thinking about the packaging of the thing that you were ultimately going to sell in your own business, sort of before you got there, right? And I think any learnings from that experience, because I think it's very easy to go out and be like, I have a bunch of skills in-house, right? Especially if you've been early stage, you've worn a bunch of hats, you've done a lot of different things, and you sort of know to some level of depth a lot of different things. And you're like, well, I can, people have problems that I could solve with this skill set. How do you sort of focus in and say, actually, like, this is the way that I'm going to talk about this. This is the specific problem that I'm going to choose to focus on. And obviously there can be multiple problems, but like, how did you choose the things that you were actively communicating to people were going to be your offering?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that's really key when you're getting started. It was an iterative process, to be honest. Like I think, my initial like discovery calls, or like calls with a potential prospect, were kind of all over the place. Like, we don't have an internal RevOps function. We kind of don't know what we don't know. I, as the founder, built our HubSpot process from scratch, and I know there's a lot of gaps. I know there's a lot of opportunity for optimization. And my talk track was like, yeah, I've done all of that. I've worked at tons of early stage startups. I can help you figure everything out, and just nothing tangible in terms of communicating the potential value, or even my approach or my methodology. It was just like, what, we're going to audit everything and just start working on every little thing in pieces, and it might take 3 months or 6 months to get to your ideal state. We don't know. So, again, I think like all of those like failed conversations are learning experiences. I've been recording all of my calls with prospects or founders that I'm getting feedback from, and analyzing the call transcripts and iterating on my approach to discovery or pitching my services. Part of it was like I guess identifying some common points with the different founders that I was speaking with. I think it can go in a lot of different directions. But for a lot of early stage companies, without having a dedicated HubSpot admin or RevOps or senior RevOps function internally, the trust of the data and the data integrity and all the automations that were happening is often a point of contention. And uh, there's also quite often low-hanging fruit in terms of user adoption. HubSpot is very capable. There's a lot of properties and views that are exposed by default, but they don't necessarily adapt to the nature of that specific business. So, just cleaning up and creating custom views for the salesperson to have the information they need at the right time is a huge win that helps you get momentum. And yeah, I guess get through a list of priorities. I'm kind of rambling here, but
No,
um,
I think it's interesting that we've talked for what 10, 15 minutes here, and we've barely talked about HubSpot, right? And I think that there's something interesting in that's there's a lot of going out and doing your own thing that is going to be not actually implementing HubSpot, not actually working in the tools. It's going to be talking to stakeholders, whether that's pre-sale, post-sale, like wherever it is. And I think that often that's the bit that's easy to forget about when you're in-house, right? It's like you get shielded from that to a large degree because you're in a specific function generally, no matter how many hats you're wearing in an early stage company, you're never wearing all the hats, unless you're the solo founder.
correct.
So I think that's sort of a big transition point. So how do you think about that in terms of like organizing the business when it comes to, I have this many sales calls, but I still have clients that I have to serve. And how has that changed over time from sort of how you were thinking about it before you made the jump to like where you are today? You're what, 6-ish months in, a little more than 6 months into being full-time solo. Like
Yeah,
how
yeah,
has that sort of
exactly.
transition been?
That's probably been the biggest challenge for me. It, initially I was able to tackle both with like 3 or 4 clients, doing networking calls, prospecting calls was manageable. But as you get to the 10 client mark, the demand coming from clients uses up your entire day. Like, in January, I was probably working 12 to 14-hour days, 7 days a week, because I didn't have a solid process in place. I didn't have solid SOPs. I didn't have the team in place where I could delegate some of the execution to. So I think I knew I was going to hit that inflection point at a certain point in time, and I was anticipating around the 6 month mark. So things are going according to plan, I guess. But that's currently what I'm really focused on. Like I right now I have the capacity for a few additional clients. So I could be putting the pedal on business development and networking and trying to get some pipeline going. But instead, what I'm doing is looking for a full-time hire that I can bring in to have the confidence that I can have that additional capacity to go from 10 to 15 to 20 clients, and building a lot of templates, SOPs, process maps internally. So we have a really solid like foundation, a repeatable process. Once we start building the team and I start delegating some of the client work to a resource.
How do you think about that loop between like we sold this thing, we executed on this thing, now it's a thing that we want to go again and sell again? How do you sort of map that like is that part of the sort of process mapping for you? Is not just here's what we implement in sort of as part of our service, but here is how we execute on the business as we grow. Like it's very easy, I think, as a solo founder to be like, well, I have everything in my head, it's fine.
Hmm.
But you both like it doesn't scale very well, but also it's harder to find the repeatability, the things that are actually causing a problem, even if it's just you doing it. How do you think about building that loop, um, especially as you start adding people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that that also comes down to like how I honed or narrowed my beachhead offering, I guess, or main offerings. I think like the role of a HubSpot consultant or a RevOps consultant is extremely broad. And I'm not saying that you should specialize in sales operations or cold outbound infrastructure and only touch that. But if you can specialize in something, you're going to build a reputation around it. You're going to get people to recommend you for that service. You can build a whole bunch of thought leadership and educational material around that specific aspect of go to market and really build a reputation around it, but also build a really solid process internally and solid standard operating procedures that you can templatize and reuse as you're offering that services to additional clients. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now. We really have a really big focus on sales operations. Probably, in part because of my experience. Typically, early stage companies don't have a ton of marketing budget, don't have a ton of reputation, or yeah, I guess they're not as well known in the
Yeah,
market.
they're
So
not
it's typically
brand to the
a
same degree or
sales
brand
led.
echo. Yeah.
Yeah,
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 it's I mean, quick
exactly.
plug for the keynote next. We're going to talk a lot about this. Like, how do you build a flywheel around documentation as content, or the idea that depth is a moat, right? And I think that it's and I think this goes for everything, not just whether you're thinking about running a solo HubSpot business, but uh, it's very hard, especially early, to disconnect product and marketing or product and go to market. And if the more you disconnect them, the harder you make everything, right? Because you now have sort of competing or at least parallel and divergent paths of work. So it's really interesting what you just mentioned there, that it's, the deeper you go on a specific thing, the more specific you get compounding benefits in multiple places, right? You get to, create the same SOP for this client versus that client. You get to, create a piece of educational content that is valuable to attract the same type of client that you now have a process for. There's all these things that sort of just add up over time and make it exponentially easier to build a business that scales sustainably. Um, so
I love that you brought up the content flywheel because I think that ties into it perfectly, and it's a good analogy too for how I think about building templates and SOPs internally and building like a structured offering, I guess, for specific services.
we
Um,
we definitely didn't have this in prep, but I'm curious the question, like, how do you think about, because I think that there is certainly a view, I think in some service providers, that like this is our process, it's proprietary. Uh, you know, People hire us because this is our process, because this is our depth of expertise. Therefore, we can't use it publicly. Like we can't share it in marketing. We can't share it in, things that other potential competitors could go use it. Like, how do you think about that piece? Because I think there's a little, it can often be contentious.
yeah, it is, and I think there's a bit of a balancing act. I have a T-shirt from Gary Vaynerchuk that says, "Ideas are shit, execution is everything." So I kind of do subscribe to that philosophy. Like one of my strategies around content and thought leadership is like I'll share the playbook, maybe not in finite detail. Like I might not give you the code that I use in the custom code action in the workflow, but I'll share the entire process map and the philosophy and the reasoning behind it, the expected benefit, the expected value. And in theory, somebody could take that information and build it internally. But because I'm targeting early stage companies, positioning myself as the operational partner for a first sales leadership hire, for example, and really targeting companies that don't necessarily have that dedicated resource to RevOps or HubSpot administration. My goal or my expectation is people will see that I'm an expert in the field, and maybe they do implement one of the playbooks that I share. But what about the other 12 playbooks that are also related to that aspect of go to market that they don't have the time or bandwidth to put into place. And that'll lead to them reaching out and asking me questions on how to do it, and eventually hiring
Yeah.
us to
I mean, I
implement
think
it.
talk about another compounding benefit of getting specific and being focused on who you serve and what you do. Uh, it starts to become a real value prop. And I think the best thing, they're not a HubSpot example, but like just because I've talked to them a little bit, but like uh, Anthony Pieri and Robert Kaminsky on, you've probably maybe seen them on LinkedIn, product marketing content. They have one service. They like literally each one on their website is like, we've run 300 early stage startups through this. If you want to hire somebody for this service, just ask them how many people they've run this service with. Like there is no way that you're going to outcompete them on that specific thing. And I think that there's to the point about like we could go do this in-house. It's like, yeah, we could take this playbook and do it in-house for the first time ever. As a business, is that a risk that you're willing to take versus this is a service provider, this is what they do, they've built a process, they have authority and depth around this thing. And there's that sort of, I mean, again, we'll talk about this in the keynote, but like the idea that you essentially eliminate competition by getting specific, right? Once you find the
I agree.
problem, you become the only person who ultimately, and this is sort of the goal, if you're aligning your marketing and or your, go to market and service offering, is that you sort of become the obvious solution for the specific thing that you do.
Yeah,
To
and I
the
think it's
specific.
all to the customer's benefit. I mean, yeah, the amount of learnings that agency that specializes in that specific aspect of go to market has from all those other client engagements are a bunch of mistakes that you can avoid by hiring them.
Right.
And same thing from a like specializing in a specific aspect of go to market in terms of your service offering. All like if you repeat that across all your customers, then you can take all those combined learnings and really build. I there's a few people that I follow and I do a lot of like cold outbound infrastructure, but they're a lead gen agency and their specialty is just sending millions of emails that get a lot of replies every month. But you'll never understand what the deliverability of Google to Google versus Google to Outlook is on your 10,000 emails you're sending a month, but across millions of emails, across dozens of clients, then you're able to understand what those parameters are, what those trends are.
Yeah, I think it's a really great point. So final sort of question as I think we're getting ready to go back to full session. I want to sort of double click on something that Matt said in the first session around, sort of deliver value at and maybe this is a two-part question actually. A deliver value sort of at every opportunity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that often comes up, especially when you're talking about or thinking about going out and doing your own thing, is like if you're doing that and you're providing value to a business, you don't need scale as a solo operator. You just need enough leverage or enough value that you can capture to make the money that you want to go make to make the business sustainable. How do you think about pricing? And sort of what's the thing that you would tell somebody is like, okay, I'm considering making this jump. What's the thing that you should be thinking about?
Well, I mean, I think like there's probably like benchmarks that you need to take into account all the time that you're not being paid. It's not billable hours, all the business development, all the internal process that you're building. So, I think we're like rule of thumb, you probably want to be charging around 4x what your hourly rate is as a full-time employee, as a consultant. That's one thing. The other thing too is like I'm getting into more and more like project-based pricing, being able to provide a fixed cost or a fixed estimate to a prospect on a given project. Helps de-risk it for them, and just gain confidence that like there's already a well fleshed out process. We've done this before, so we're able to scope it out really well, and I know exactly what my cost is going to be. It's difficult because I think a lot of, especially in early stages, a lot of companies are just like, I want you to audit and show me what I don't know or make recommendations. So there's still a lot of work that we do that's hourly based right now. But I'm trying to get away from that in the initial project, which is typically a foot in the door, and most clients that we complete a first project for sign an ongoing retainer. And for now, still going to be hourly, I think, for retainers. But the majority of our first projects are fixed
Cool.
price.